In my most recent video, I mentioned that Stone Ocean is in fact a part that I don't hate or love. It would be a solid C tier. But then I was thinking, I don't think I've ever done a traditional ranking of each part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But tier lists are fun and effective for getting the point across in an easily digestible way, so we're gonna do that. I'm making the official Shuckmeister part tier list. Objectively, the best one in existence. I also challenge my fellow content creators to try and come up with something better, because I think there's a lot of fun that could be had, and I guess there's gonna be a drought of content for a long while. More on that in a future video. If you're in the comments right now, before you watch the video, comment below which part ranking you have and see where it lines up with mine at the end of the video. Also, if you're worried about spoilers, I'll try to keep this to general plot points as much as possible, especially with the most recent and ongoing parts. But before we get into that, this video was sponsored by Dungeon Fighter Online, link in the description. Dungeon Fighter Online is a free-to-play multiplayer hack and slash with retro arcade-style side-scrolling that you can play on Steam or their website. In DFO, you can join action-packed raids and dungeons with over 700 million registered online users from all around the world, picking from 16 unique characters with over 60 different class advancements to fit how you like to play the game. Currently, the 5th advancement and the newest update to the Gunner class, called Blitz, will be updated. So there's a bunch of different events going on right now. Newbies are always welcome, gives new players a chance to tag up with veterans to receive various rewards for learning to clear optimal level dungeons. Level Up Booster Activated will generously reward players for picking an event character and getting them to max level 100 with constant rewards all throughout the way. There will be Twitch drop events from April 19th to May 17th, so you can tune into DFO streams with participating channels for free in-game cosmetics and exclusive avatar sets. For all new players, you can redeem the coupon code Welcome to DFO Gift for 10 life tokens, 50 Remy's Sparkling Touches, and a funky avatar set. And just to top it off, there's space-time jumping research centers and space-time traveling system events where optimal level dungeons will be dropping the event materials that you want to get so you can get the in-game gear. With all these amazing events ongoing, it's a wonder you haven't already downloaded DFO, but there's still time, so use my link in the description. Thanks again to Dungeon Fighter Online for sponsoring this video. To make this a little more interesting, I'll include both the series of one-shots from The Spoke Kishibe Rohan and Crazy Diamond's Demonic Heartbreak, since it's the only new piece of JoJo manga currently ongoing, because we still have no news about JoJo Part 9 at the time of making this video. I don't anticipate Part 9 drastically changing the rankings of the other part, with the only possible exception of JoJolion, but I assume it's going to operate like most other parts do, where it will just be a continuation of the story and not provide too much clarification on some of the weaker aspects from the previous parts. By including these other two sources of JoJo media, it'll help balance out some of the tier list. Alright, let's set the ground rules. Despite my personal biases and love for the series, I think it's really safe to say that the worst any JoJo content gets across the board is C tier. JoJo can be a bit formulaic and delves into outright plagiarism occasionally, but I don't think it ever denigrates the part below C. Structure-wise, art-wise, plot-wise, none of the series is unbearable to read. In this tier list, what separates the wheat from the chaff, or more accurately, the Joestar from the Jobro, would be an untimely death that literally comes out of nowhere because we gotta get to the end of the part. I mean, a story that can be enjoyed and read and acclaimed in spite of the series it's from. I'm not advocating for part skipping, but I'm saying the parts that are most concise in a vacuum have the greatest probability of inspiring someone to read more from the author. That's the baseline that I'm using for determining objectively the best part. And I think really only one part stands tall above the others in that regard. And if you're a fan of the channel or someone who's been in the JoJo fandom for more than 5 minutes, you already know what the answer is. But I would like to go through the other parts first to sort of justify why that's the only S tier in that category. Now we're going to be starting from the bottom of the tier list and working our way up. Typically each part in each tier is pretty interchangeable depending on what you seek from your manga reading experience or your anime watching experience, but I think this is a pretty good guide for where the parts line up as objectively as I could possibly be. Which means I'm going to be honest about some of the flaws in every part. Don't get personally offended. If you enjoy these parts and have a different ranking, please let me know in the comments below. Starting at the very bottom shouldn't surprise anyone. It's Phantom Blood. Part 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure isn't anything bad, but it's certainly a product of its time. You could tell Araki had a spark of something that could go even further beyond, but his ideas just weren't fully formed yet. Jonathan is an effective protagonist for what the part requires of him. The gentlemanly type is fitting for the trust and honesty that will be carried down through each member of the family, but it can be a little one note sometimes. The supporting cast, while primitive, is certainly good for the time it came out in. Speedwagon's constant affirmation makes him a prime candidate of being the hotly debated best girl, but what really steals the show for part 1 is Dio. Dio deserves all the praise he gets in the story because having a great antagonist for driving the plot is always enjoyable as a viewer of any piece of media. What can I say? It's this Dio. You know him, you love him. I don't think it's controversial to say that JoJo's would not be the same kind of series without him. However, if part 1 did a bit more to stand out from the crowd in its execution, I could certainly have placed it higher on the list. Flashback to the future. If there's one thing you can say about part 8 JoJolion, you can say that it has style. We've spent 10 years reading about Josuke in a sailor suit, fighting to the finish because he eats his magic fruit, not spinach. And there's a flavor of almost every single panel from this series. Whether it's tart, sweet, or any of the other flavors from the layer of parfait, there's so much to love from it. The cast is probably one of the largest and most pronounced compared to the previous parts. Certainly everything that was featured in Shonen Jump. The stands in JoJolion are among my favorite in the entire series, both from a design and ability perspective. The atmosphere of post-311 Morio, based off of Miyagi Prefecture, which is where I'll actually be working in Japan pretty soon, just strikes this perfect balance of melancholy and hopefulness. So you might be wondering, if I have all these great things to say about part 8, why does it rank so relatively low to everything else in the series? And unfortunately, that comes down to pacing. See, JoJolion's first 57 chapters are some of the greatest in the entire series, and could easily rival the top spot on this list. However, reading the second half of the story monthly, and giving it a reread, I and many others see that while this doesn't necessarily dictate a change in quality, I think you can definitely see a change in the direction of the part. I've extensively covered my thoughts on JoJolion before, actually going into it meticulously with my friend Aeon Star, where we covered every single arc of the part, so it's certainly not like just black and white where one half's good, one half's bad. So if you want any clarification on that, I would just say watch those videos. One of the primary reasons is, interestingly, the juxtaposition between the newest and oldest parts. As part 1 was propped up by Dio, part 8 easily has the most controversial JoFo in the entire series, and yeah, for me, I'm certainly not a fan.
JoJolion, 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 JoJolion.
Now we get to the part that the angry people on Twitter and Reddit will refuse to watch because they can't escape their echo chamber. Now, I've gone over extensively in multiple videos my thoughts on part 6, the good and the bad, but I just want to make it as clear as day for anyone who constantly misrepresents what I have to say. Stone Ocean, like every other part of JoJo's, has good and bad aspects to it. People not liking something that you like doesn't mean they're attacking you or your own existence. It's stupid that this needs to be said in the first place, but there is a certain vocal portion of JoJo elitists who will shut down opposing viewpoints or any criticism as coming from sexist, homophobic, illiterate haters. There are things to love, like the dynamics between the characters, the inspirations for some of the stands, the iconic positions of not only the panels but the covers too, and the finality of the conclusion. Also, Rakeel, just precious Rakeel. And then there are some aspects I don't find appealing, primarily stemming from solid character motivations being consistently undermined, steps towards goals that are nigh on incomprehensible, and characters and their abilities being less than consistent compared to their previously stated understandings of certain situations and concepts. Part 6 has a lot to love from it, and just with many of my other videos, I'm not trying to take away your enjoyment of it. I often propose solutions to issues I see in its execution in a somewhat comedic and entertaining way, but yeah, I don't find myself falling head over heels for it. But now we'll move into B tier, where things are going to get a bit more consistent and enjoyable from a storytelling and execution perspective. Crazy Diamond's Demonic Heartbreak is a manga that exists. I don't know why it exists, but I love it for the fact that it does. It takes one of the fan and author favorite minor antagonists and sends him on a journey with one of the fan and author favorite JoJos. In no world would I have thought it was possible for both Josuke and Hohors to be in the same story at the same time. But hey, 2022's had so many surprises already, I just don't know what we're gonna expect next. The reason this guy places solidly at B tier is because it's currently ongoing. There's a ton of potential to be capitalized on here. Will it succeed in making a story that lives up to the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure namesake, or will it shoot itself in the face in its execution? Only time will tell, so let's check our multiple wristwatches like Hohors and wait and see. But I've been enjoying every moment of it so far. At least in the Western fandom, it's been pretty common to downplay the influence and enjoyability of Part 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders. I think this happens for a few reasons. Many newer fans only consume the anime, which, while it was beautifully animated in comparison to even some of David Productions' most recent work, it does have a few pacing issues and a bit of inconsistency in the portrayal of Jotaro's personality. Like Phantom Blood, its age does show a bit, having every chapter needing some sort of fight per the rules of Shonen Jump at the time of its serialization. This directly affects the memorability of most of its minor antagonists, besides, of course, the aforementioned entire Equestrian. But despite these weaknesses, the globe-trotting journey that this band of misfits endures is one of strong comedic moments, excellent scenery, and iconic imagery. This is when JoJo's Bizarre Adventure finally started to solidify its personality as a series, and you can certainly tell. This is where the main character takes more influence from the surrounding cultural inspirations at the time, most notably the Bancho-esque design of Jotaro. And it's where character designs as a whole become a bit more experimental, and I think for the better. Araki was really good at making sure that every character's silhouette stood out. Unless... wait. No, wait, how could I have missed it? It's basically confirmed! Rounding off this tier is the inclusion of Rohan's Bizarre Adventure, otherwise known as Araki's own self-insert into the story. Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan really delves into the more bizarre aspects of JoJo's as a whole, captured in not only seemingly meaningless plots, but also the horror inspirations that drove most of the early arcs in the series. I quite enjoyed the stories that managed to tackle different supernatural elements related to yokai or traditional Japanese legends. It's also fun to occasionally see updates from characters after the events of Part 4. What holds these Rohan one-shots off from anything higher is that sometimes they dip a bit too much into the haha funny random lol that plagues a lot of different series that tackle similar topics. Also, surprisingly for a series named after Rohan himself, you'd imagine that he'd be a little more influential in some of the one-shots. Sometimes he acts as more of a side character, and I just think that's a very interesting writing choice. Now we're getting into the real heavy hitters in the series from this point on. Each part mentioned has enjoyable attributes that nearly always outshine its flaws. Part 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable, is unshakable from the A tier. Driving it to have such a high spot on the tier list would be its world building, some of the best in the entire series. World building as a concept doesn't have to be something as grandiose as One Piece or Lord of the Rings. It can come from the passion an author has about his hometown, and a drive to write a story around it. Josuke feels like the guy next door that you would just want to hang out with after school. Something about the original Morio is just always a joy to visit. This beautiful Duang has plenty of interesting inhabitants and colorful characters to keep your attention as you tour from location to location. Honestly, the weaker aspect of Part 4 is that characters are introduced to really drive home how inspiring each location is in the town, and then really don't have too much to do after that. But I certainly think Part 4 is one of the most influential antagonists in the entire series that lays the groundwork for a mystery that is aptly delivered on and resolved. If the town was the major driving factor for why I loved Part 4, Joseph is easily the major factor for why I love Part 2, Battle Tendency. I know Joseph is a bit more on the contentious side with some members of the community, believing that he undercuts any tension in any scene with his wild antics and constantly predicting what your next line is. Speaking of which, Tsugi ni omae wa, your tier list is trash. Toyu! But this is honestly what I love from the series. With the word bizarre in the title, you would imagine Phantom Blood would have gone a little wackier, but Araki wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. is. So he went all out with how crazy a story could be in battle tendency. I don't think I've laughed more reading this unless it was a gag manga or One Piece. It can be a bit overdone sometimes, but it feels like a natural progression in the original trilogy, and kind of like a prototype to Stardust Crusaders, with more limited travel and the shorter reemergence of presumably dead characters. I just love the way that it tried something completely different and succeeded at being enjoyable. I know many people, myself included, enjoy the anime over the manga, and that may be influencing this part of the decision, but it's still a joy nonetheless. I respect those that tell me the truth, no matter how hard it is. You should be careful. It's dangerous to be an honest man. And saying part 5 has always been one of my favorite parts, from when most people hated it, through when most people loved it, to now again, when a very vocal minority of people say they hate it, is astonishing. This has really been quite a ride. You may notice that the parts I tend to enjoy have the least direct influence on the overall story of the Joestar bloodline. And that's because I enjoy anecdotal tangents that the story can take with its established plot lines and characters. Nowhere does that shine more strongly than in Part 5. Golden Wind was where the concepts of fate, dreams, and inherited will were firmly developed. Also, the increased inspiration from both high fashion and religion, specifically Catholicism, drew me into it more than the previous parts I mentioned. And I think the setting of Part 5 certainly is one of the best, as it manages to take the stronger aspects from Stardust Crusaders and apply them to a week-long road trip of Italy. The characters, while numerous and not all given enough time to develop their motivations fully, certainly execute their roles much better than passably, especially compared to the earlier runs of JoJo's. Giorno, while occasionally taking the backseat to some of his companions, fulfills the role both figuratively and literally that he needs to be in this story. At its core, it's a story of the fight between the devil and the Son of God, and I think that story being portrayed through the use of this world and these characters is one of the most fascinating tales I've ever seen. Finally, we arrive at the part of JoJo's that I consider perfect. No story is perfect, but this one part comes as close to it as possible. Steel Ball Run. This one manga is worth all of the hype, but instead of talking about the in-universe reasons, let's consider some of the behind-the-scenes topics. This feels like the story the author, Hirohiko Araki, always wanted to tell, but never got the chance to. Taking his love for both the American Wild West, combining it with the growing influence of religion that was played up in Golden Wind and Stone Ocean, freeing himself from the shackles and restraints of Shonen Jump as he exposed it to the seinen audience of Ultra Jump, and the conclusivity of the previous installment of the series shows that all the pieces were laid out on the board. Araki would just have to make sure he moved carefully. And over 8 years of serialization led to one of the greatest manga ever put to print. Second probably only to Berserk. No, I haven't read Berserk yet, that's just what I've been told. I mentioned that the stories that tend to garner wider audience appeal happen to be the least involved with the continuous plot lines, and that's one aspect Part 7 really has going for it. And similar to Part 5, it's another one of those stories with a very simple concept that's extrapolated into a larger narrative as the story goes on. At its core, Steel Ball Run is the story of a man learning to walk again. All of the trials and all of the tribulations of that journey are punctuated through Johnny Joestar, the supporting cast, and easily the most fantastic duo of JoFos, making Steel Ball Run objectively the best part in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Wow, okay, that video was supposed to be way shorter, but I just got so passionate about talking about each part that, yeah, here we are. Like I said, within each tier, parts are pretty interchangeable depending how I'm feeling about certain aspects of it. I'll be looking forward to seeing your rankings and how they differ from mine in the comments below. Please make sure that you do all the like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Make sure you check out Dungeon Fighter online. Have a beautiful doing, and I'll see you all next time.